Yo, crazy hair day. I want to do a very quick video, so I thought the best way to do that would be not to wear the hat, so I feel incredibly self-conscious. No, Kenny Golladay just signed, apparently, unless I'm being fake tweeted by fake Adam Schefter, with the New York Giants, and Stephanie Smalls is incredibly happy about it, which is great. I think I have to rewrite a part of my vacated targets article because, there are a lot of blind squirrels around and they find a few nuts every now and again, but I prefer to, find the nut because I have the right map. I don't know, this article, you've caught me mid-grind mode, like it's late right now, like real late. Hence why I just turned the camera on and didn't have a hat. But what I'm grinding on is what to think of Kenny Golladay, basically. So that's this video. If you're interested in what a nerd thinks, or a fake nerd thinks, about the Kenny Golladay signing, stay tuned, I guess. Let's go to the big screen so I can get really small. I prefer that. Alright, so the first thing to know is I want my Kenny Golladay trutherism out there in the forefront. Like, I took flack and I was on Kenny Golladay as a rookie before he was Babytron or whatever he's called. I'm just saying, I got like receipts. I got an article written before then. I'm just saying. It may be since gone because it was on Player Profiler, and they update their articles pretty regularly, but it was out there. And I'm a big fan of Kenny Golladay. Came from a smaller school, elevated at an older age, and and my whole line was he could break out in the NFL. He could break out at a higher competition level because he's already done it once, like a breakout of a breakout. Because the minute he elevated to a higher level and got in the field, he dominated that second college level as well. So I was a big fan. But I tend to be contrary to popular hype, and the hype right now is Kenny Golladay's great. I've never seen top 12 upside in Kenny Golladay, like through his stats and watching his career very intently and enjoying a lot. Like, I don't think he's I think the comparison, and I've already seen it made, is Stefon Diggs changed team in the prime of his career and, became a top 12 wide receiver. The thing is, we kind of saw that upside with Stefon Diggs before then, and we also saw it with DeAndre Hopkins, who did the same thing. Now, John Brown, Jamison Crowder, they weren't top 12 wide receivers. We hadn't seen that before in their career either, but they did elevate after they moved from their respective teams in 2018. John Brown went to Buffalo from Baltimore. Jamison Crowder went to Washington to New York. So what I did is I revamped part of that Target Share article, which, I still think is one of the best things I've written. And, if you haven't read it, like, I'm personally very upset about that, I guess. But part of what I did in there was try to understand what happens when wide receivers change teams, because that's when a lot of vacated targets narratives come up. Now, I was specifically looking at it the other way, like what were the targets that were left behind, supposedly bunny rabbit ears, and what happened to them, and that's a different story. But in doing that, I actually created a data set where I could look at what happened to wide receivers after they left. And so I already knew, and it's in that article, that wide receivers on average, and I talked about Stefon Diggs because this was last offseason, if I remember right, that basic expectation was that he would maintain and see a slight decrease. Same with DeAndre Hopkins. I still thought they were great players, probably being underrated by the market a little bit. There was a point at which Stefon Diggs was like bordering not a top 24 wide receiver, and that was too far, but I didn't see upside. Now, in the case of Stefon Diggs, we saw upside in 2020 very, very vividly, like in an ecstatic manner. He was wide receiver 3, if I look at this data set real quick, in 2020, which, he hadn't actually done, but we've seen that potential of him while he was sharing the field with Adam Thielen, and Kirk Cousins was the guy, and then not the guy, and then some other guy. But we've seen that level of efficiency and that level of production from him before. We haven't seen it from Brown and Crowder and some of these others on the list. So what is this list? This is, I revamped the data set basically. I went to the Patreon, which if you're on Patreon, you have access to it, the NFL database, and I created a column that was team N+1, so year +1. What team were they on the next year? And then I isolated with that little yellow column there, which players had actually changed team. And then I got rid of everyone who didn't change teams all the way since 2000. And yeah, these are the basic stats we always have at the front of the database for that player the year before they change team. And then I did a simple, index match search, which again, I've got a video somewhere showing you how to do, for their stats in year 2. So what I'm able to do is not just look at players that change team, which is this column. I'm also able to look at players that increased in points per game in their second season. So after they moved team, they were scoring more points per game on that new team. Now, what I was able to do is find out that out of something like 95 wide receiver 1, so the top scoring wide receiver in points per game for the team before they moved, so, that's Kenny Golladay, right? He's the Detroit Lions wide receiver 1. So what happened to wide receiver 1s when they moved team? Out of the 95 players who actually moved team as wide receiver 1, they actually saw an overall decrease in opportunity, production, efficiency just across the board. However, like I said in that vacated targets article, it wasn't like a devastating decrease, but it was a slight downtrend that led us to believe that our expectation shouldn't be an increase in opportunity just because they're going to a new team, right? So that's the average. That's our baseline understanding. Typically, it's not a positive, but it's also not a negative. If a good player moves team, they're still a good player, so we still like them. Now, is that age specific? Honestly, I think you're going to do yourself a disservice looking at age, because that makes you not like DeAndre Hopkins, who maintained being a good player in 2020, and maybe liking Stephon Diggs. Instead, we can just like both of them and get them both right. So, that's our overall understanding, and I got an average. You can't see that. Let me skip over to the image here. Like, that's useless. All right. So what you see here is I create an average table where I could define age. I will also define year, because what do I really care about what Randy Moss did in the modern era of the NFL, I guess? I don't know. I also could define how many games they played in the next season. So I want to get rid of all those players who, yes, moved team, but didn't get to play at least half a season, so their points per game doesn't matter, right? And across the board, across those first 11 stats that we have in the database, in terms of position rank, points per game position rank, games played doesn't really matter, number of opportunities, their target share, their expected points per game, their fantasy points over expected per game, in other words, their efficiency on their opportunity. Their ADOTs obviously remain relatively stable. And again, Stephon Diggs succeeded not because he had an increased ADOT with Josh Allen, but because he's a really good wide receiver. That's it. Yards per team, pass attempts per game, pass per game. Across the board, wide receivers on average who are under the age of 28, who played 8 games the following season with a wide receiver 1 in the year before they changed teams for that other team, saw an overall decline in opportunity and output for fantasy. So that's the baseline, and that's the average table I've got up. However, if we go back to, not this one, sorry, I'm mid-grind, like I said. Where is it? No? I got a lot of things up here. Give me a second. Okay, this one. All right. If we go back to this data set, and what about we look at the players who decreased in points per game, causing that overall average, right? Out of 95 players, only like 12% saw an increase. So I think, and this is my ultimate conclusion, that we'll see the same type of upside for Kenny Golladay that we saw in Detroit. He's a really good player. He's just not a Stephon Diggs, or for a direct comparison, he's Babytron, not Megatron, right? Megatron didn't really matter. Kenny Golladay is not a product of his situation, but he's not able to outplay his situation. That's my typical feeling on him, having looked and watched his career pretty closely. He's an incredible player. It's hard to find players that good, for fantasy especially, at all. So I'm not trying to take away from him. I just think we'll see him be what he has always been, because it's an old trope, but that's kind of what we always see. And so Brown and Crowder also saw an increase when they moved teams, right? But it was an increase from like wide receiver 20 and 26 to around about the same. They finished as top 24 wide receivers. They finished with 14 and 12 points per game. The year before, they'd only had 8 and 9 points per game. So it was an increase, but it's not a top 12 output. Now, Kenny Golladay is slightly better than Brown and Crowder were in their situations before they met, but I think we'll see a similar output from Kenny Golladay. Anyway, I do want to make the positive case for Golladay as well, because I do hope he can exceed in a new situation. Now, for me, given the understanding that I've eked out, and I really don't understand how targets work, but I know most of the narratives flying around about them they're just not true. That's just not what happens. So, given what I have been able to figure out about it, that players are very much responsible for the roles they earn rather than the team gifting it them or targets laying around on the ground like loose change. Instead, what I think, there is a potential for him to increase production from last year in 2021 without, vacated targets or some such narratives, or the idea that a prime wide receiver or the idea of a player under 28, because all of that is false. It's just not true. And that's this list. But let me give an example of this. Well, these are the names, and I've got the data set. I published like a written version of this on Patreon, and I just posted the Google sheet so you can see exactly the sheet, and you can sort by players that increased or players that decreased. So these are the players that increased. You've got those four I've already mentioned. Also, Brandon Cooks, Josh Jacobs, James Jones, who went to the Packers and had that one great year. Golden Tate, Steve Smith, Anquan Bolden, Brandon Marshall, Vincent Jackson were digging back into 2011 here. Pierre Garçon improved when he went to Washington. I think we all remember that top 24 season. Terrell Owens, Steve Smith, Randy Moss. And you see how lots of these players are older when they're traded and they'll still improve their production. I think that's how age can screw you on this a little bit. I know we're used to liking young players, but we should be more used to liking proven good players, which Kenny Golladay is. And the thing about this list is Kenny Galladay's name fits pretty well in here, right? He's a good player. He's not seeing a downturn. He's not moving team because he's had some off-field issues, or because the team has cap space problems, or because of any of this. It's because he has been targeted, sought out, and offered. Frankly, I think the Giants are bad at this, by the way, but they've offered a big bag of money to a player they think are great. That sounds to me like a DeAndre Hopkins or a Stephon Diggs or even a Brandon Cooks, although he was more traded than bought from another player. Now, some of these players like Steve Smith, Anquan Bolden, they left the team just in free agency, but most of these players weren't considered bad. They weren't bad acquisitions or just cheap acquisitions. Now, if you look at the other list, so players who decreased, and we can just look at 2020 players or 2019. Oh, actually, I've only got 2018 players in here. Okay. So they're more vivid in our minds. These are the players who moved teams and then saw a downturn in production. Now, Antonio Brown in 2009, after going to New England, okay, that doesn't really compare. But Odell Beckham, he's a good player at a young age in the prime of his career, saw a downturn. However, when he went over there, well, you know the story of the Browns. I don't want to make this video too long, because it's already meant to be 10 minutes and 12 minutes over it. But you know there were significant difficulties with him fitting in to the culture, and also Baker Mayfield struggling to be as good as we maybe necessarily thought he possibly could be, although I still think there's kind of hope. Anyway, Golden Tate, Demaryius Thomas, and he was, how old was he at that point? Again, age can screw you, but it also can be useful. When he went to Houston, it wasn't like they gave him a bag, right? He wasn't targeted. He wasn't specifically sought out. I mean, it was thought to be a fairly good, savvy vet move. Now, Jarvis Landry saw a downturn when he went to Cleveland for the first year, but we've since seen him be increasingly productive. So that's a concern for me for for Kenny Golladay, that you can not be more productive and still be a good player. And a lot of the players on this list Jarvis Landry fits on the other list in terms of names and type of player and the place in their career that they're at when they moved, but he's still sort of downturn. And so that's a real downside for me for Golladay. Despite still being a good player next year, he could see a downturn, and Jarvis Landry kind of shows us that. Now again, however, the majority of players on this list are like Kelvin Benjamin. They moved teams, but they weren't sought. They weren't traded. They weren't specifically offered money to move. And I don't remember the context of all of these, but I do remember Rashard Matthews basically moved because, the team didn't want a player with lower draft capital. And I like Rashad Matthews a lot, so I felt bad about that. But he did have a great year with Tennessee that one year, and then went with the Jets, and it never really happened again. So I think Kenny Golladay fits better on the list of players who improve production than the list of players who decreased in production, except for the few examples. And remember, there are a lot of them on here, and that's why the average is down. Like, there are 76 players since 2000 that saw a decrease in production despite being the wide receiver 1 in points per game the year before. So there is a Jarvis Landry problem here, or cautionary tale, where a player can still be good and see an overall decrease in production. However, I would say, just being honest, looking at the two lists, Kenny Golladay, to me, fits better on this list. Having said that, go back to what the small amount I understand about this subject isn't that therefore Kenny Golladay can be a top 12 wide receiver. I don't know why we would think he can do that. He's been an exceptionally good player as a teen producer. You know, he can be 15, 16, he can have week 1 upside. He's a great player, but he's not a DeAndre Hopkins or a Calvin Johnson, and Stephon Diggs has shown some of that potential. So, to me, I still think he has top 24 upside. It doesn't drastically improve where I think he'll finish next year. And that means I think the market is going to overtake me in terms of overall value. But I would buy him for that top 24 price. The thing is, I would buy him for that top 24 price last week or 2 weeks ago. Like, that means it's not overall about the fact that he's gone to the Giants that means anything to me. So the way that could be more positive, if you're interested, is that he's now going to a better team. And I don't have to go into what Drew Lock is. Drew Lock is a potential big problem in that equation, but I think Evan Ingram and Sterling Shepard and the receiving, and Saquon Barkley, the receiving and ancillary, the other skill position players on that team, offer potential for that team to be more productive than the Lions have been while Kenny Golladay's on that team. Now that would provide more opportunities, more scoring opportunities, and a potential increase in points per game output for our fantasy little game. So that's how you can convince yourself that Kenny Golladay is worth getting right now. Now unfortunately, and I should have done this video beforehand or several weeks ago to point it out, because Kenny Golladay frankly stands out in a few different ways, as I'll mention in a second. The time to get him with those considerations was probably long before this trade, like this offseason, the last few weeks. And I kind of just dropped the ball not mentioning that a little bit, but hopefully you've managed to do that. If you like Kenny Golladay, I don't expect a significant downturn. I think he could increase in production, but I don't want to pay top 12 upside prices. I don't think he's the Stephon Diggs of this year. I think he's the John Brown, Jamison Crowder, Brandon Cooks of this year. A great player going to a new situation that could be more positive and see an overall increase in production. He's not going to outplay the situation. You kind of have to, I don't think, you kind of have to bet on the situation being more positive. And Drew Lock is, for me, a big problem in that, but I'm not a quarterback evaluator. So, go ask someone smarter than me about that, I guess. So that's where I'm on Kenny Golladay. Exactly the same place, despite the fact I have to say so many things to get to the exact same place. Was that interesting? I don't know. Yeah, ultimately, I'm not buying top 24 wide receiver upside. I have running backs to somehow get a hold of so I can win my league. As well, as nice as it is, I don't think I'm paying that. However, I do have some interest in what the market's going to do, and probably why I should have mentioned it. And this is my personal draft helper. I type in the names as they're drafted, and it shows me who's falling, and I can look up some basic stats. And for that, I import DLF ADP. Just gives me a rough sense of who's falling. In a dynasty league, Kenny Golladay was already ranked as a wide receiver 25 by ADP. That's why I kind of feel like I dropped the ball a little bit, not putting him on a list or making a video about people dropping in ADP too far, because that's just stupid. Sorry, ADP market. And I know we have to fit in all these young players. And again, ADP and DLF right now has Jamar Chase, it has Devontae Smith, all these young players we're going to take shots on, which is when these good players we know are proven producers can take a fall, which is also why it's kind of by wide receiver, not by running back season right now, overall in the market. And because Kenny Golladay and even Deontay Johnson to some point is a little bit more proven. were falling, and so was Cortland Sutton. Cortland Sutton's outside the top 24, which is like no one likes youth or proven. I don't know what that's about. But also, and what I want to make the podcast on this week is Juju Smith-Schuster. I want to talk more about his production, why I don't understand why people think he's now mediocre. I really don't. And why he might have more potential. And the reason I'm interested in that is because he's currently being drafted in the 4th round. Kenny Golladay was being drafted way too late in the 5th round before this trade. So his ADP is going to shoot up. And if players go up, other players come down. Now, the difficulty with trades in this area is, while ADP has to have one top 24 wide receiver and one top 18 wide receiver, a player you're trying to trade with can have as many wide receiver ones as he wants. He doesn't have to, or she doesn't have to, think that Juju Smith-Schuster is wide receiver 20. Just because that's where ADP has it. She can have him as wide receiver 12, even if she or he can admit that the value's low. And so essentially what I'm saying is trade works very differently. I use ADP as a synonym of value, but it's also kind of fake, because on your team, you don't just have to have one wide receiver 20. They can all be wide receiver 20s, or they can all be wide receiver 12s, and I think that's one way of describing why ADP is kind of a lie when it turns value, but it's really the only reference I have. Having said that, as new players come up, this draft class heats up, and Kenny Golladay should rightly increase. He should already have been higher than that, damn it. And so should Cortland Sutton. By Cortland Sutton, actually. There you go. I just dropped that in there. And Allen Robinson, Keenan Allen, and Maury Cooper, because they're all these. This is a great wide receiver round. They're all a little bit too low. According to ADP, I think their value for trading for them right now would be too low, to be clear. Anyway, so I'm interested in what happens as the draft heats up, as Kenny Golladay shoots above some of these players. It might make some of these players even more buyable. Now, the problem with trades, especially with Juju Smith-Schuster, and why I mentioned, he's overrated and underrated at the same time. His ADP has done nothing but tank. He's being drafted way too low, according to ADP. But if you try and trade for him, you're not going to pay this price. It's going to be, no one wants to trade him for this price. The problem with trading for a Keenan Allen, Aaron Robinson, a Juju Smith-Schuster, even a Cortland Sutton, who I just said, is you're going to have to give them something they actually want, not just give them value. That's the thing about the wide receivers in rounds 4 and 5 here. Everyone wants them, even if they want to rank them below young players. So you really have to give up something for them. Which, like I'm saying with Golladay, the problem is that the only way I'm going to do that, give up something that is actually good, a running back, more than one first round pick, is if I think I'm getting top 12 upside, which, like I said, I think is in the range of outcomes for Kenny Golladay, but I don't think it will be my expectation. I'll talk about Juju Smith-Schuster on the pod and Cortland Sutton maybe another time. But I think Juju specifically might have, my expectation might be that he can produce there. So he's someone that I might be able to pay there. Frankly, for these prices in the offseason, I'm waiting until I can buy running backs. Because those are the league winners, and you just have to give up way too much value here. These are value assets that I'm not looking to spend value on value all the time. And finding that top 12 wide receiver is a lot harder, which is why I'm interested if some of these players fall a little bit. So anyway, that's some summary thoughts on trading for him right now. If you can get Kenny Golladay for a first plus a little bit, anything that comes under for you less than 2 first-round picks, I'm very much in on it. I think he's a great player. I think he has top 24 upside. I think he has top 15, top 14 upside. I don't see Stefon Diggs level upside in 2020 for Golladay. But again, he looks more like the players who have done it than haven't done it. But I'm a slave to what's happened before, you know that. So yeah, that's my summation. Hopefully you find it interesting. I don't think we do live takes on fantasy nearly enough. And this is, on the money. This just happened. This didn't happen yesterday at all. But yeah, anyway. Let me know what you think or what I'm missing about Kenny Golladay. And if you're interested in this research, check it out, or read that article maybe on DLF. That's a cool article, I hear. Someone told me. I don't know. Anyway, appreciate it. 24 minutes. I'm going away to hang my head in shame, because this wasn't 10 minutes at all. But I appreciate you. Thanks very much, and talk to you again next time. Bye.